Welcome to Chapter 18, Auctions. Beginning in the 1970s, academic economists began to become interested in auctions. There were a number of high-profile auctions that governments ran to sell off large and unique items. So some of the ones that Hal mentioned were offshore oil leases, radio spectrum auctions. So the Federal Communications Commission had these very large auctions that took areas of the radio spectrum that had previously been unused or used by obsolete technology and then auctioned them off. So they were of great value. No one really knew how much, and it was critical that an auction be designed that would both allocate these valuable radio spectra to the people who valued them the most and also maximize revenue for the government. So as these problems arose, economists' interest in auctions were peaked, and a lot of work was done on auction theory, designing optimal auctions, and most importantly, thinking about what rules would be required to induce people to bid their maximum value. Okay. Now, Hal has a very important role to play in all this, and in his chapter on auctions, he actually doesn't say very much. So I will toot Hal's horn for him. As I've mentioned before in earlier parts of the course, Hal is the chief economist of Google. And Hal joined Google in 2002 and has worked full-time as their chief economist since 2007. There's this excellent old interview that was done with Hal almost a decade ago by Wired magazine. It's about a 10-page interview where he talks about his work at Google, and I found this to actually be quite a useful supplement to this chapter, because Hal, I don't know whether it's for the desire to keep his day job separate from his textbook authoring, but anyway, I was able to combine some of the information from that interview into this lecture, and you'll see the quotes later. So one of the people who was tasked with coming up with a way to sell ad space on Google via auction, it was done by a Google employee whose father was an economist, and he at least set up an early stage of it. And then Hal was brought in and asked in 2002 to review the plans to conduct online auctions to sell ad space. So Hal helped Google to tweak the online ad placement auctions, and of course the result has basically revolutionized how advertising is done. And no doubt, well, and this is in this Wired interview, they were saying how when Google initially set up, they envisioned that their sources of revenue would be in licensing their search technology and selling other services, and they didn't foresee that ad revenue would be a major source of their income. And these auctions that Hal helped design and perfect have been so successful that has been the overwhelming majority of Google's revenue. That's created many, many billionaires, many Google millionaires, and I sincerely hope that Hal Varian is one of them. I would be shocked if he weren't. So this chapter is immensely important because it shows us the basic theory of auction design that Hal then applied to Google. So this is, although it can be a little bit archaic at times, I'd encourage you to pay attention to it because this is where the money came from. Now, returning back to Varian's text, Hal mentions two different types of auctions. If we want to classify them broadly, the private value auctions and common value auctions. A private value auction would be auctioning off a good that different businesses or consumers may place different values upon. And I thought of the old platitude, one person's trash is another person's treasure. So people can have wildly different valuations. Where this is possible is a private value auction. So for instance, most of the things that are auctioned off on eBay, I would argue are private value auctions, particularly if they're antiques or unusual type goods. A common value auction, in contrast, is a homogeneous valuation of a good. And the classic example that I could think of was a treasury bill. So as you know, the way the U.S. government funds its debt is they have auctions where they auction off a promise to pay the bearer of the bond $50,000 in 90 days. That is a treasury bill. And the federal government auctions off millions and millions and billions of them. And it is a homogeneous good. Everyone knows, everyone can do the math and figure out what this promise to pay 50 grand in 90 days is worth. Okay. The other types of classifications that Hal talks about are different rules of bidding. So these would be what we would think of as types of auctions. Probably the one that's most famous and most widely known would be the English auction. So imagine you have an auctioneer and bidding starts at the reserve price. So that's the lowest price that the seller would deem acceptable, and then prices are bid up. So the auctioneer would pit the bidders against one another, and there would be a certain increment that with each additional bid, we drive up the price. And then when all the other bidders drop out, the highest bidder wins the good at the final price that they bid. Hal also mentions the Dutch auction. It's called a Dutch auction because it was used in flower markets in the Netherlands. And what would happen is the auction would begin at a very high price, and then according to a timer, the price of the good would gradually drop until someone agrees to pay the price, the current offer price, and then they get the good. So where English auctions bid prices upward, in Dutch auctions the prices gradually decline. A sealed bid auction almost doesn't need explanation. The name describes it all. Bids are submitted in a sealed envelope, so no one knows what the bids are, and then when the auction ends, all the bids are opened up, and the highest price, the person who bids the highest value wins the good and has to pay the price that they bid. A slight variation on this is called a Vickrey auction. This was named in honor of the 1996 Nobel Prize winner, William Vickrey. And the way a Vickrey auction works is that the highest bidder wins the good in a sealed bid auction, but they pay the second highest price that was bid. Now, initially this seems kind of crazy. Why wouldn't you make the highest bidder pay the price that they bid and not the second highest price bid? As we get further into the lecture, I'll unpack why. The quick reason is that if people pay the second highest bid, then they have an incentive to bid their true maximum willingness to pay. So it's very important in designing an auction to incentivize people to truthfully reveal their maximum bid amount. So that's the reason for a second price auction. Okay. Hal mentions that he sets up a general auction, right? So we're going to consider a private value auction. So that's where all the bidders can have different legitimate values of the good. And we have small n bidders, and they have values V1 through Vn, which we assume all to be strictly positive. and suppose that this good has no value at all to the seller. Hal mentions this is a special case of an economic mechanism design problem. So the idea of an economic mechanism design is, and this is actually one of the new hot fields in economics, that we design a mechanism to produce a desired result. So in this case, we have two possible goals that we might be interested in. We might be interested in Pareto efficiency. We might be interested in profit maximization. So the mechanism, actually you remember from the previous chapter, we introduced this idea of Pareto efficiency. An outcome is Pareto efficient if the only way to make one person better off is to make another person worse off. In the case of an auction, Pareto efficiency occurs when the person who values the good the highest is the one who wins. So if we had an economic mechanism design problem with the goal of Pareto efficiency, what that means is we design an auction mechanism such that the person who values the good most ends up with it. Profit maximization is rather self-explanatory. We're trying to maximize the revenue that the seller receives. So Hal claims that the Pareto efficient outcome is for the person with the highest valuation to win the auction and get the good. And if we wanted to prove this, we could do a classic Varian proof and suppose not. So if I suppose not, what that means is, what if I had an outcome that I claimed was Pareto efficient, but the person who won the auction was not the highest value bidder? So suppose that the current winner, bidder I, has some value which is strictly less than the maximum valuation bidder. If we were to reallocate the good from I, the winner of the auction, to J, the person who had the maximum valuation, in return for some payment between the winner's valuation and the maximum valuation, so that payment were given to the person who won the auction, this would be a Pareto improvement. We make at least one and possibly both bidder I and bidder J better off. And no one is made worse off. So it's an unambiguous Pareto improvement. The problem of profit maximization, if we start out with the trivial, make the assumption, the fanciful assumption that the seller knows the valuation of all the bidders, profit maximization is really rather trivial, right? You just simply award the good to the highest value bidder and charge them their true valuation. But of course, in the normal case, the valuations are unknown. And then we can think of different mechanisms that could be implemented that would increase the seller's revenue. One is to establish a reservation price. So reservation price is a price that if the bid price does not reach the reservation price, the good is not sold. Now, and oftentimes what this can do is it can force a high value bidder. So suppose we have an auction where there's one person who places a really high value on the bid, and the second highest bidder values the good at a much lower amount. Establishing a moderately high reservation price can force this high value bidder to pay more to win the auction than they otherwise would have. But the flip side of this is that if the reservation price is set too high, the good is not sold. And this outcome clearly is not Pareto efficient. Because it's possible to engineer a Pareto improvement, right? To award the good to the high value bidder at some amount that they're willing to pay. Okay. Now, an English auction, Hal claims that an English auction with no reservation price is Pareto efficient. And that should be rather obvious, right? Because if there's no reservation price, what that means is that the good will be sold. It will be sold to the highest value bidder as soon as they outbid the second highest value bidder. So since the good has been awarded to the bidder with the maximum value, the outcome is Pareto efficient. Hal tells us that a Dutch auction is not necessarily Pareto efficient if the high value bidder waits too long. So the incentive in a Dutch auction is each bidder has to come up with an idea of the valuation that other bidders might be likely to have. And then they wait long enough for the price to fall so that they don't have to pay too much. What Hal is saying is that perhaps a greedy bidder might be tempted to wait too long, and then if someone with a lower valuation comes in and agrees to pay that amount and the auction ends, that would be an outcome that's not Pareto efficient because the maximum value bidder didn't receive the good. The efficiency of a sealed bid auction also depends upon each bidder's beliefs about the other bidder valuations. So if each person believed the other bidders had valuations similar to their own, there would be an incentive to bid higher. But for instance, if a bidder in a sealed value auction believed that the other bidders had relatively low values, there would be an incentive to bid less than the true valuation. And then, much like in the Dutch auction, we would have the possibility of the good going to someone who is not the maximum value bidder. In a Vickrey auction, it is a dominant strategy for each bidder to bid their true valuation. When we get to the game theory chapter, which is, I remember it's chapter 29, we will cover what a dominant strategy is. A dominant strategy means that each bidder will bid their true valuation regardless of what everyone else does. So if you were playing against other rational bidders who are also bidding their true value, you would want to bid your true valuation in a Vickrey auction. If you were playing with a bunch of scheming strategists, right, or maybe dim-witted bidders who bid less than their true valuation, you still want to bid your true valuation. And I'll explain why, I believe, in the next slide. So to show that truth-telling, so in other words, bidding your true valuation is a dominant strategy equilibrium, what we'll do is we'll consider deviations from it. Is it possible for a bidder to gain by submitting a bid other than their true valuation in a second price or Vickrey auction? So what if the high bidder chooses to bid something less than their true valuation? Now, if that high value bidder still won by submitting a lower bid, you remember that in a second price auction, the winning bidder bids the bid of the second highest bidder. So if the highest bidder bid less than their true valuation and still won the auction, bidding less than their true valuation reduced their chance of winning, right, all else equal, but it also didn't affect the amount that they actually pay for the good. So if the bidder still wins after having bid less than their true valuation, it doesn't make them better off. But by bidding less, the high bidder could possibly lose the auction. They have a risk of doing so. So in that case, they're clearly made worse off. And then we consider, what if a bidder submits a larger bid than their true valuation? Of course, if they submit an inflated bid, and then win, it's possible they could end up paying a second price that's larger than their true valuation, in which case they're made worse off. If they don't win, it hasn't affected their well-being. So what we've shown is that, I guess if we wanted to be really careful game theorists, we would say this is a weakly dominant strategy, meaning that you're never made better off if you bid something other than your true valuation. You could very possibly make yourself worse off, but in expectation, you would never make yourself better off by having done so. eBay is, for all practical purposes, a victory auction. And I'm sure you all have purchased things on eBay. The highest valuation bidder wins the good and pays a bid increment over the second highest bidder. And so that's why Howell claims that eBay is, for all practical purposes, a victory auction. And we've just shown in the previous slide that in a victory auction, it is a dominant strategy to bid the true valuation. But as you know, many people in eBay do not bid their true valuation of a good. And the question is why? Why do we see this deviation if in a simple victory auction, it is a dominant strategy to bid the true valuation? Remember, again, a dominant strategy means you want to bid your true valuation regardless of what your opponents do, regardless of what the other bidders do. So Hal gives us a couple explanations for why you see late bidding and people not bidding their true valuation. The first one was due to a couple auction theorists that I wasn't familiar with. These guys said people may not want to bid early to avoid driving up the selling price, particularly if the bidder may be well known. So if you were bidding on a rare and unusual item, and suppose that some person, I love classic cars, right? So if a car was being bid on eBay and the name of the bidder was well known and famous as a collector of that particular type of car, that might cause other people to come in and try to bid that person up or take it away from them. So these auction theorists were saying it might be a rational response to wait to the very end to avoid that sort of thing from happening. And then Al Roth, who was the Nobel Prize winner in 2012 on mechanism design, he said that late bidding might be a way of avoiding bidding wars. So it's kind of a variation on the same theme. It always seems kind of pretentious to offer my own advice after citing what Nobel Prize winners have recommended. But my analysis of it would be that homogeneous commodities and rare or unusual items are very different types of auctions. In fact, you could argue that a homogeneous commodity in the limit is really a common value auction. So for instance, if I wanted to buy a new smartphone off eBay, we all know what the value of this particular good is. So, and if there's a continuous volume of new smartphones coming up for sale on eBay, it may make more sense to try to shade your bid a little lower and hope that no one is paying attention to this auction and you win it at a bargain price. If I don't get the lottery this time, I know that there's going to be a whole volume of similar products coming up. So there's not a substantial cost to me losing. I might play the lottery and hope I win. But if we're talking about a rare, unusual item that's not likely to come back. In that case, the costs of losing the auction are pretty high. An example I could think of, I have an antique vehicle in 1937, and finding parts for it are really hard. But in a couple instances, I, believe it or not, found parts for my nearly 85-year-old vehicle on eBay, and when they come up, I jump on them and I bid my true valuation because I really don't want to lose, right? Because who knows when the next distributor cap for this vehicle is going to show up. I want it. So I'll play games for homogeneous commodities. For rare and unusual items, I will play the dominant strategy for what it's worth. Okay, so Google. Ad auctions on Google and others are what Hal calls a position auction. So what when you do a Google search, a position auction says what order do the matches for your search appear on your Google page. It's considered quite valuable to be the first item listed in the search. And firms are willing to pay so that their link appears first in the list of in the list of answers to this Google search. So all players rank the positions in the same way. So everyone agrees that position 1 is best, position 2 is next, and so forth. But they may value the positions differently. So this is a private value auction, right? So let there be S slots where S numbers from 1 to capital S, and suppose that slot S can expect to receive X sub S clicks. And then suppose that each advertiser states a bid per click within each slot, and let that be B sub 1 through B sub capital S. So B1 would be the amount that an advertiser is willing to pay for a click on their ad listed at the top of the list, right? B2 would be the amount that they're willing to pay per click if their ad is listed in slot number 2. So each slot S is awarded to the highest bidder at the price they bid for the next lower slot. So it's kind of a modified second price auction. So remember, B2 is the amount that they were willing to pay per click if their ad were listed in the second position. So if they win the first price, or the first slot, they're the highest value bidder in the first slot, they are awarded the first slot, but they pay per click what they were willing to pay if their ad were listed in the second position. Okay? So Hal tells us that a winning advertiser can expect to earn this, this expression that's to my left, right? So V sub S was the value to the bidder of, it was the value to the bidder of being in that position, in position S. B sub S plus 1 is the bid that the bidder was willing to pay for the next lower slot. We multiply that. So the expression in the parentheses then is the gain that the advertiser can get from each click, right? The value of the click minus what they paid for it, and we multiply by the number of clicks that they receive. So that would be the earnings that they could expect to receive. So although this, Hal calls this a generalized second price auction, it is a victory auction because you're paying what you bid on the next lower price. It's a second price auction, but he says that in general, it's not a dominant strategy to bid the true value. And the proof of this, he just gives numerous counterexamples of how a advertiser could make themselves better off by bidding less than their true valuation. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to go over a couple of them, but you get the general idea. Okay. So first, let there be an auction of 2 slots and 2 bidders. The reservation price is R, and bidder 2 offers B sub 2 for the first slot. Okay. Bidder 1 considers an offer, they consider bidding B, right? So they would offer B. So what we would say then is that the profit to bidder 1 would be, so they have a value V of slot number 1. If their bid exceeds the bid of the other, of their competitor, right? So that's the top line in this case statement. If B is strictly greater than B2, then bidder 1 wins the auction. So for each click, they earn the difference of their value and what they had to pay for the click. So that's V minus B2, and they can expect to receive X1 clicks. If they lose the auction, they will receive position 2, and they will pay the reservation price for it. So they get a margin of V minus R for each click, and they get X2 clicks. So their expected profit then would be the probability that they win the auction multiplied by the profit conditional upon winning, plus the probability that they lose the auction multiplied by their profit if they lose, right? So that's a typical expected profit, or any expectation equation. You take each possible outcome and multiply it by its probability of occurrence. So Hal takes that last expression and then rearranges it into this expression, which he numbers equation 18.1. And the point Hal makes with this is on equation 18.1, notice the expression at the far right in the square brackets. It is that part of the equation that's in the square brackets that determines whether the expected profit is positive or negative, right? So when that square bracketed term is positive, expected profit will be positive. When the square bracketed term is negative, expected profit is negative. What that means then is the bidder wants to win the auction if expected profit is positive, but the bidder wants to lose the auction if expected profit is negative. So Hal proposes a bidding rule that is related to this dominant strategy equilibrium, right? And he proposes that the bid B should be established by this rule that's listed at the bottom, right? So, and what he says is the high value bidder should only pay the minimum necessary to beat the second bidder, who will pay RX2. Okay. So, and in the text itself, Hal was saying that the amount that the bidder wishes to bid all depends upon the value of these marginal clicks, right? What is the value that the bidder places on the additional clicks that they would get in the first ad position versus the second? And this bidding rule that Hal proposes captures that, right? So we have a value V, and X1 minus X2, those would be the additional clicks that the advertiser receives for being in the first position versus the second. So the amount that they bid is in proportion to that marginal valuation. Okay. Hal talked only very briefly in his book about quality scores. So he just mentioned in passing that bids are multiplied by a quality score to get an auction ranking score. So that first line was from the good book, from Variance Text, chapter 18. But then this larger quote that I have below that in quotation marks was a direct quote from the Wired magazine interview with Hal, where they talked more about Google's quality score. So Google determines quality scores by calculating multiple factors, including the relevance of the ad to the particular keyword or keywords, the quality of the landing page the ad is linked to, and above all, the percentage of times users actually click on the given ad when it appears on a results page. And there are other things that Google won't discuss. There's also a penalty involved when the ad quality is too low. In such cases, the company slaps a minimum bid on the advertiser. So the value of Google as a search engine depends upon consumers placing, or searchers placing high values on the ads that they receive. So after this quote in the Wired magazine interview, they talked about the armies of econometricians that Google employs, that Hal supervises, that rate the quality of ads, right? So basically, this is a giant market mechanism design. Google, so Hal, and this is why Hal is definitely the right person to be doing this. He is setting up basically market processes within this world of Google searches to ensure the smooth functioning of Google. So much like the Bureau of Labor Statistics has the Consumer Price Index to measure inflation, this Wired magazine interview was talking about Google has an index to assess the quality of their ads. So all these things take econometricians to run, which is why I always encourage you that one of your elective courses you should take as an econ major, one of them really ought to be econometrics. Okay. So auction revenue and the number of bidders. The expected revenue increases in the number of bidders and is equal to the second largest valuation. So this is rather easy to see and kind of trivial, I would argue. If you have more bidders fighting over ad slots, that's going to raise the revenue. And if we wanted to apply the statistician's toolkit to this problem, if we order the bids from largest to smallest, the second largest one, the value of the second largest bid is what statisticians would refer to as a second order statistic. And order statistics have well-known statistical distributions, and you can show very easily that the value of this second order statistic increases in the sample size n. Okay. So Hal now turns his attention to common value auctions. And suppose that in a common value auction, remember this is where everyone agrees on what the value of something is. So this would be trying to buy a smartphone. This would be trying to buy radio spectrum, right, in a radio spectrum auction. It would be buying a federal oil lease. So suppose that the value of each bidder is equal to the true valuation V plus a stochastic disturbance term epsilon. So epsilon is a random variable. It has a mean of 0, and it can take on both positive and negative values. So in a sealed bid auction under this mechanism, what you can say then is if everyone is bidding their true valuation and their true valuation follows this scheme, V, the true valuation, plus the stochastic disturbance term, the winner is the person who had the largest epsilon. which could very well mean that the winner has overbid for the good, right? That the winner, to quote Alan Greenspan, had irrational exuberance and bid too much. So if they overbid for the good, the winner is clearly worse off for having won the auction. So under a condition like this, the optimal strategy is to bid less than your true estimated value to avoid the winner's curse. And Hal states that the optimal bid declines as the number of bidders grow, because as the number of bidders grow, the winner's curse problem becomes larger, and you would want to correct more aggressively for it by underbidding. These types of problems, right? Auctions in general, if we wanted to become more abstract and theoretical, they're examples of what we would call a two-sided matching problem. And Hal gives a number of well-known, well-studied two-sided matching problems, coming up with dates for a prom. So imagine a high school prom, and you have people trying to find dates for the prom. This is a two-sided matching problem because one side proposes to the other side has to accept. So both sides have to agree on it. Another two-sided matching problem might be finding roommates in a college dorm. Right? Hal mentioned high school students matching to colleges. Right? Pledges matching to a sorority or fraternity, or new physicians matched to medical residencies. So economists who've studied two-sided matching problems, Al Roth, the Nobel Prize winner that I mentioned a couple slides back, is very well known for this. A match is, so one of the things that economists are worried about is stability. A match is stable if for each matched pair there is no other matched pair where each partner prefers the other pair to their current match. This is a little awkwardly worded, but think about the prom example. So what that says then is that a match is stable if two people who are going together to the prom, if there is no other couple going to the prom where each person prefers the other person's date, right? So in that case, swapping dates would be a Pareto improvement, and we would have a reallocation of matches. So a match is considered stable if that doesn't exist. And Hal states that stable matches always exist. One of the famous algorithms to ensure a stable match is the deferred acceptance algorithm. And this is in fact the algorithm that medical schools use to match physicians to residencies. So as applied to medical residencies, step one, each residency program offers a position to their most preferred physician. So the residencies rank order the people who are available to have residencies, and they issue an offer to to doctor number one. Right? So each residency program offers a residency to doctor number one, their top doctor. And then each physician records the list of offers that they receive. And after all the residency programs have issued offers to their most preferred candidates, each physician goes through their list and accepts their most preferred choice and rejects the others. So the programs that have now been rejected will issue an offer to their second most preferred candidate. And then we'll go back to step two and keep going until all physicians have received at least one offer. And that's when the deferred acceptance algorithm ends. And this is guaranteed to promote a stable match. Okay? So Auctions and two-sided matching problems are examples of mechanism design. And then Howell draws this very interesting parallel between mechanism design and game theory. In mechanism design, we know the outcome that we want to receive, and we attempt to design a game that will end in our desired outcome. Right? In game theory, we have the rules are established, and we try to figure out what the outcome is going to be. So in game theory, we start from rules and try to anticipate outcomes. In mechanism design, we drive this process in reverse. We have a desired outcome, and we attempt to generate rules that are guaranteed to implement our desired outcome. So that's the sense in which mechanism design and game theory are the inverse of each other. Now on to the practice quizzes. So the first one, a dealer decides to sell an antique car by means of an English auction with a reserve price of $500. There's two bidders and three possible bids, $7,000, $3,900, and $500. And each bidder has a probability of 1/3 of having each of these valuations. And they don't collude. The valuations are independent of one another. And the question is, what is the dealer's expected revenue? So one way of doing this would be just through brute force. So I have the valuations of bidder 1 on the valuations of bidder 1 are rows, the valuations of bidder 2 are columns, and then each cell would be the amount that the amount of the winning bid in the auction. So if both bidder 1 and bidder 2 had a valuation of $500, the maximum bid or the winning bid in this auction is going to be $500. So moving down one cell, if bidder 1 had a valuation of $3,900, bidder 2 had a valuation of $500, bidder 1 wins, but only has to bid just an itty-bitty bid above $500. Okay, so we get all these outcomes. And since the valuations are statistically independent, that means each cell is equally likely to occur. So what I can do is multiply each outcome by its probability of occurrence. So we have 5 outcomes where $500 is the end, 3 outcomes where $3,900 is the winning bid, and 1 outcome where $7,600 is. And we get the we get the expected revenue. If we wanted to be a little more theoretical about it, let me repeat the brute force matrix from the previous slide, but we can derive the probability of each outcome theoretically. So if B were the winning bid, the probability that the winning bid is 500 would be 1 minus the probability that both valuations exceed $500. So that would be the lower right-hand or southeastern corner of this matrix. Right? So the probability that each bidder's valuation exceeds $500 would be 2/3. So the universe minus the probability that we're in the lower right corner is the probability that the winning bid is $500. And of course, this is the same as the previous slide, as you'd hope to be. And then the probability that the winning bid is $3,900 would be the probability that both bids exceed $500 minus the probability that both bids are $7,600, or in the far southeast corner. And you see that we get the identical solution. So we didn't have to use brute force. We could use theory. The second one I wanted to go through was problem 18.5. Jerry's Auction House holds sealed bid used car auctions every Wednesday. Each car is sold to the highest bidder at the second highest bidder's price. So they're using Victory Auctions. So what that means then is that each bidder should bid their true valuation. On average, 2/3 of the cars that are auctioned are lemons and 1/3 are good used cars. A good used car is worth $1,800 to any buyer. A lemon is worth $270. Most buyers just have to choose at random. But there's one bidder, Al Crankcase, who licks the dipstick and then he makes a proclamation whether he thinks this is a good car or not. I remember, just to tell a story, I remember when I was Ted Bergstrom's teaching assistant for this course. And of course, Ted Bergstrom wrote this question. He wrote all the quiz questions. But he made this story up, just because he thought it was kind of clever. Although Ted Bergstrom was a farm kid, as am I, but in the little farm town that I grew up in, I actually knew someone who would do this. His name was Willard Franks, and Willard Franks would taste the oil on a dipstick of a car. And he said if he tasted any gasoline, then he knew that the rings were in poor condition. It had blow-by, you had fuel in the oil, so it was a bad car. So reality conforms to the Intermediate Micro Workbook. So the question is, how should Al bid given he has this test? So we know that a good car never fails Al's test, but half the lemons fail Al's test. So it's not an airtight test. So what we need to do is figure out what is the probability that a car is good given it's failed, or given it's passed Al's test, right? So and then what is the probability of being bad? Okay, so I claim that the best way of solving this problem is using Bayes' theorem. So I've shown you Bayes' theorem on the left in glowing generality. So the probability of event A given event B is the probability of B given A times the unconditional probability that A occurs divided by the unconditional probability that B occurs. So in this case, the two events that we're interested in is whether a car is good and whether or not it passed Al Crankcase's test. So we are told that a good car never fails Al's test, but half of the lemons fail his test. So what this means then is we need to figure out the denominator on the right-hand side of Bayes' theorem. We need to figure out the unconditional probability of passing Al's test. So the probability of passing Al's test is the probability of passing Al's test given a car is good. We weight that by the probability that the population of cars are good. We add to that the probability of passing Al's test given a car is bad, multiplied by the probability that a car drawn at random is bad. So if a car is good, it will always pass Al's test. That's the first part of that statement above, right? A good car never fails Al's test. So the probability of passing given a car is good is 100%. And we know from the previous slide that 1/3 of the cars are good. The probability of passing given a car is bad is 50%, right? Half the lemons fail the test. And the probability that a car is bad is 2/3. So when I add this all up, 2/3 of cars drawn at random are going to pass Al's test. So we can now use this information. We have all the pieces of Bayes' theorem. We can compute it. The probability that we pass, given it's good, is 100%. The probability that a car is good is 1/3. That's in the numerator of Bayes' theorem. In the denominator, the probability that a car passes Al's test is 2/3. So this means that the probability of a car being good, given it passes Al's test, is 1/2. So half of the cars drawn at random and tested pass Al Crankcase's test. So Al will bid his expected value of a car that passes his test. So he knows there's a probability of 1/2 that the car is good. There's a probability of 1/2 that the car is bad. So that means Al is going to bid $1,035 on cars that pass his test. If a car fails his test, Al knows with certainty that it's a lemon, right? Because all the good cars pass Al's test, but half the lemons fail. So half the lemons fail, half the lemons pass, but any car that fails must be a lemon. So that means that if a car fails the test, Al bids $270. The other bidders just bid the expected value of the car, which is 1/3 times the price. So 1/3 of the cars are good. Good cars are worth $1,800. Bad cars are worth $270. A bidder will bid $780 on all cars. What this means then is Al will win every auction on a car that passed his test, and he will lose the auction on every car that fails his test. Now remember, any car that fails his test is bad. So what that means then is that other bidders in the auction will receive only bad cars. Al wins the auction on cars that pass his test. The cars that passed his test were all of the good cars and a proportion of the lemons. So what we have then, Al bids $1,035 on cars that pass his test, $270 on cars that fail, and Al gets, and all the other bidders receive only lemons. So that is option 1, right? $1,035 for cars that pass his test, $270 for ones that fail. Normal bidders will get only lemons.